Welcome everyone to the leadership series for church volunteers. Like Pastor Fraser said just a moment ago, the purpose of these meetings is to equip you to be faithful leaders, not only here at the church, but also in your home, the community, and in the workplace. And so over these next meetings, as we gather on the first Wednesday of every month, I'm going to have different pastors on our staff up here sharing parts of their testimony. And they're going to be drawing out leadership principles from those parts of their testimony. So this is going to be a really exciting time. You guys are going to learn more about our pastoral staff, and then we will hopefully be able to equip you with some leadership skills and testimonies and principles to make you guys even more faithful leaders in everything that you do. So today, I'm going to be joined with Pastor John Mark. And the reason I really wanted to start with Pastor is because there's always been a part of his story that I've been really interested in hearing about. And it's when you and Gina stepped foot into First Baptist Fairview. And I want to hear what was going on in your mind. You're looking at a smaller church. Like, in your wildest dreams, did you ever think that First Baptist Fairview could become something like it is now with Cottonwood Creek Church?
That's a great question. What was going through our minds? I think maybe what were we doing, right? Because we had served in some ministry, but did we ever see it would become this? I got to be honest with you. When I stepped there first Sunday, I just wished our church at some point would look like this. I mean, seriously. I mean, so if you ask me, did I ever see it coming? Never saw it coming. From time to time, people say, you got to write a book about what God did at Fairview, now Cottonwood Creek, and that would be the title of the book. Never saw it coming. Never really saw it coming. And we just knew we had to do a couple of small, important things that still apply to every life group and student ministry even today. So
that's awesome. When you set foot in those doors, you never saw it coming. But did you have some kind of vision for the church, or what was going through your mind? Like, what did you see? What was that vision God put on your heart for First Baptist Fairview?
You know, one of the things Gina and I have always felt is the church is about one thing. A couple, obviously glorifying God, fulfilling the Great Commission, but the Great Commission is about being what Jesus did, and what Jesus did is he came for people, right? He impacted people. So for us, the vision was ultimately I never gave the church when we came in, and still haven't to this day, never gave the church a 5 or a 10 or a 15 or a 20-year vision, okay? Never gave that. Here's what I felt like, that if we were in God's will today, doing what God wanted us to do today, and we did that tomorrow and the next day and the next day, that in 5 years, we'd be exactly where God wanted us to be. So I never saw this coming, but God did all the time, right? All I know is that as a church and hopefully as a pastor, and then as God brought in staff, we were faithful every day, every week, every Sunday to just do what God was calling us to do that day and be obedient and faithful and say, this church is about people.
You know, not everyone in this room is a pastor or feels called to be a pastor. And we're talking about how God grew this church. But I think there's people in this room that whatever you are doing in your life, whatever you're pursuing, maybe you've been working to grow it. Like maybe you've started something, it's been small, whether it be relationships or a family, and you're trying to grow your family. Maybe you're trying to grow your career in the workplace, and you're trying to climb the ladder. Whatever it is, all of these things that Pastor's talking about can apply to all of us in this room, no matter our vocation, no matter our pursuit, or whatever it is that we're doing. Pastor, I know that when you were at First Baptist Fairview and God started to bless it, I know it was not easy. I could probably get Gina up here and hear some of those challenges.
She could tell you how not easy it was.
Yeah. What were some of those obstacles? How did you keep that vision of what God called you to do in front of you when you guys started in humble beginnings and you're faced with challenges? What did you guys do to get over those obstacles so you can see the Lord continue to bless your faithfulness?
You know, there were always all kinds of obstacles, and you have them. If you're in a life group teacher, whatever, children's ministry, you got obstacles. You know, when we came to Fairview, there were kind of 3 different obstacles. One was the ministry that was already here. Then it became facilities, and then, believe it or not, it became money. Anybody ever have any of those 3 obstacles? So as we walked in, the vision I gave for the church and literally we would stand there in that church, and I'd point at the door. And I'd say, we are going to minister to the next person that comes through that door, whether they're a member or visitor. And so that was what I kept preaching until, and you still hear me say that today. We're going to minister to the next person through the door. Our last campaign, Make Room, you saw that quote in there because that's still what it's about. But, you know, for me, the first thing I saw were some ministry obstacles. Doesn't mean there weren't good people here. There were great people here. But some of the ministry obstacles I saw were in children's ministry. We didn't have anybody leading our children's ministry. We had a full-time worship pastor. So when he left, I said, we're spreading this money out. We're going to start reaching kids. So the first thing I did is I talked to a lady who was a kindergarten teacher, and, hey, would you come over for chump change, and would you lead my children's ministry? And she did, because I knew if we grew children. Then there were things like in ministry, we were doing RAs and GAs. How many remember RAs and GAs? And man, it was so good. And the people who were leading RAs and GAs were so sweet. And they were having 4 and 5 people every week. And I heard about this thing called Awana. Okay? Heard about this thing called Awana. And I said, hey, I'm going to start Awana. Well, guess who showed up in my office? The people who were leading RA and GAs said, you're going to kill my ministry. Here's another ministry philosophy I've always had. I don't go around killing things, but if it's dying, I'm not going to feed it. Okay? And there are still at our church today, there are things we choose not to feed because it used to, RAs, GAs, when I grew up, ministered to kids like crazy. Nothing was going to compete with Awana. Guess what? We started Awana. I promised them I'm never going to kill RAs, GAs. They spent 3 months with their 4 and 5 kids. They came into me at Christmas and they said, we think our kids would rather go to Awana. I go, I do too. And so they actually killed it themselves. Student ministry, we didn't have a leader, brought in Keith Tyler. How many of you remember Keith? He was an intern at the time. I said, dude, go do something with this. Life groups. I've always felt like, if you're a life group leader in here, I've always felt like life groups would be the core of our church, all right? So I assessed our life groups. I walked through our life group. Ron Schrock, raise your hand. Okay, when I walked through, we had an old men's class, an older couples class, a very old women's class, a younger, nobody, I didn't say that to their face, Sarah. Then a couple of our other young classes would sit in circles without good teaching, and they didn't care if anybody else showed in. Ron was different. That's why he's on my staff today, just so you'll know. But I walked around and looked, and I'd going into Allen, going into McKinney, bringing people to the church, inviting them to the church, encourage them to go to life group. They walk into life group, they would turn around and leave. So I said, you know what? I'm going to start a life group. So I took 2 other couples, and I said, we're going to start a life group. And I sat there on the phone and called every visitor we had had for the last 6 months that I could find a name for. I said, I'm starting a new life group. Will you come? That first Sunday, you want to know what happened? All 6 of us showed up. Me and the 2 couples I invited. But then I started inviting people and calling people, and we began to grow, and Ron's class began to grow. I outgrew the little room we were in. I moved into the worship center as we ultimately went over. This is just ministry, knowing groups were a part of our DNA. It's what I want. That's why I still say today, I want us to be the biggest little church anyone's ever walked into. And so once we started growing, I would preach at 8 a.m., I'd teach my 9:30 life group, and then I'd preach at 11 o'clock. Then I'd preach on Sunday night. Then I'd preach on Tuesday morning. Then I would preach on Wednesday night, and I was exhausted. But that was part of what I knew I had to do. And then sooner or later, Scott Sanford showed up, and I said, Scott, I'm worn out. I need you to teach this young marriage life group. And then that life group began to split out. So groups are a part of it. Women's ministry. We had the WMU. How many remember the WMU? I see 2 hands out there. I think it was Gina and another lady in our church. I said, you know what? It's time we start a women's Bible study. And guess who was the first people in my office? WMU. Well, let's make that a part of the WMU. I go, I don't think we're going to do that. So we started our first women's Bible study. They had like 25 the first night. Guess who came into my office? WMU. Said, we don't need to be doing this WMU anymore. Nope, we don't. And you got our women's ministry up here, still passionate about it. Tuesday morning Bible study, 6 a.m. It's still at 6 a.m. I went in there, looked at it. Can I tell y'all, I am not a morning person. Everybody knows this. But I walked in there at 6 a.m. There were 3 dudes all right, that were mean as snakes. And they made terrible coffee. And so I said, I'm going to start leading this 6 a.m. group. And thank goodness, finally, Hill House showed up. Y'all give Hill House a hand. He's a morning person. But so anyway, you know, ministry, facilities, money, but ministry, we had to change some ministry to get people thinking about the next person through the door, not the 4 people in the room. What about the brokenness that is out there? And someone's coming in here looking for hope and looking for an answer. And so those are some of the ministry things.
Yeah. You know, there's a principle called adaptive leadership. And when I think of an adaptive leader, I think of Pastor John Mark, being able to evaluate and determine what is growing and what to feed and what not to feed, and then being willing to pivot. And one thing, and I'm going to stick up for our old ladies and our older ladies in this room.
I didn't mean that.
Here's a fun fact. So pastor, his title has been senior pastor, but it recently has changed. What's it changed to?
Lead pastor.
And why did you change your title?
Because I don't want to be a senior.
I got your back, old ladies and older ladies. I got your back. Got your back.
Okay, let me revisit what I was talking about. Is we were beginning to reach young couples, all right? And our life groups were not built for young couples. That's all I meant, Chase.
I just adding some laughs.
I know is it shocking that I'm still your pastor? The things that come out of my mouth, right?
Oh man, all the joking aside, the changes, determining what to starve, determining what to feed, the vision for new things. Like, what were those pivot moments in the church where maybe the Lord laid something, you're heading this direction, and then a roadblock came up to the point where you had to completely change the game plan? Were there moments like that? Walk us through those seasons.
Yeah, there were several of them. When we first started growing, we ran out of parking spots. And so I looked at the deacons, several other people. I said, listen, when you come in, if you ever remember Old Fairview, I said, you see that fence way back there? Every time you come up here, that's where your pastor is going to be parked, because I want someone else to park on the concrete. And sure enough, deacons started following me, and other people started following me. And so we built a little parking. And some of those pivot moments were, we said, well, we're running out of space. We had one service, then my life group, and then 2 services. We needed 3 services to accommodate them. So we said, we're going to build a gym. That'll be a great first step. And we needed more parking. Imagine this number years ago. The first number that we came back with on the gym was $400,000. How many of you would love to build a gym today for $400,000? So I announced it, and we had the numbers, had the architect, they built it, and he walked in, and as soon as the meeting was over, the chairman of our stewardship committee said, I need to meet with you. I'll be up here at 7 o'clock in the morning. This is Monday morning. I walk in, and he goes, I quit. We're not going to do $400,000. Well, that's kind of one of those pivot moments, right? So and I love this guy, and he loved the church. But he says, I'm done. He says, these numbers are not for me. And so I called the rest of the stewardship team, and pretty much one by one, they quit. And they said, we're not going to do this. And so I started calling some of the new people on the church. How many of you know Dale Conrad? I said, Dale Conrad, congratulations. You're the new chairman of our stewardship team. That's one of those pivot moments that, boy, I could have backed away, but I knew God was blessing the church. So we go through that. Our master plan was to build a gym, if you've ever been over there, a gym, an intermediate worship center, and a worship center. So then we hired an architect as we continue to grow, and we said, hey, we need an intermediate worship center before we build the worship center. He came out and he said, that gym is your intermediate worship center. Why are you going to build an intermediate worship center? I was like, well, good grief, we never thought about that. And here's what was the problem. The church wanted to meet in the worship center. They didn't want to meet in the gym. So I said, hey, trust me. We'll go out there. If it doesn't work, we'll come back in here. We went out there. It worked. But everybody still would call me and meet with me and say, we're ready to go back to the worship center. And I said, no, you know what we need? We need more groups. So if you go over that little A-frame church, I came in and double-deckered it. And that's where we grew our groups. And we added 6 new or 7 new life groups. Why? Because that's the core of who we are. I want people in groups, all right? Plus, it also told people we're never going back. Then we were planning to finally build that worship center over there, if y'all don't know it, and Fairview fought us. We had been through the entire stewardship campaign, pictures, full designs of the worship center. The town of Fairview said no. Then we had a problem. We started praying for 90 days, and that's how we got here. I never saw it coming. And so I am always willing to say, God, what are you up to? What do you want us to do? And how can we reach people?
I love it. Love it. Well, church family, thank you guys for joining us. Pastor, just concluding thoughts. You shared a lot of awesome testimony, a lot of ways the Lord used you. But as you're looking at this room and you see the moms and the dads and the grandmas and grandpas and the stay-at-home moms and everyone in this room, what are those final thoughts to encourage them with as they grow in their leadership?
You know, I just want to trust God. You know, trust God, love people. Trust God, love people. And, you know, it doesn't matter what age you are, what gender you are, God still got work for you to do. I will also tell you this church has not arrived. God's still got work for us to do. Your life group, it has not arrived. Your small group, it has not arrived. Your children's ministry, women's ministry, I don't believe you're done. I believe God's just getting started. The question is, are we willing to listen to Him? Because as long as He gives us breath, He still has stuff for us to do. And I'm as excited about Cottonwood Creek as I was 30 years ago. I was more scared back then. Now I'm just fired up and wondering if I have the energy today. But you keep doing what you're doing, but I will also tell you, be open to God showing you something new. And if there's something you've done in your class that's not working like it used to be, figure out what you need to do next, because that's where God will lead you.
Church, you've all witnessed, you've seen the numbers of just the growth of the people that God is bringing here. And that is a testimony to the leadership in this room, not just the paid staff, to the volunteer leaders.
Amen and amen.
And that is why we want to do our best, like Pastor Frazier said, to equip the saints for the work of ministry. And so I pray that this night, even though it is short, I pray that it's encouraging. I pray that it is equipping. I pray that it helps refill your cup that maybe is a little empty right now, because I want you to know from your pastoral staff, we love you. We are so grateful for you. And we know that what God is doing here at this church is not because either of us sitting on this stage. It's because of every single one of you that are leading and serving so faithfully and so well. We're going to be doing these leadership series the first Wednesday of every month. We'll have the upcoming dates on the screen. You guys can take a picture and put those in your calendar. Pastor, do you have anything to add?
Y'all are the best. Thank y'all. Give yourselves a hand.